It's really good to be here, and it's good to see some familiar faces and new faces as well. You're all beautiful people and all beautiful souls. I can feel that energy coming out. And so for me, in the time leading up to this gathering, some things struck me. The healing of memories, this phrase, and especially healing. It's in a way, it's something that I do as a frontline worker in my job, and in a way, healing in other aspects too, other roles that I play outside of work. I'm also, it's our first time meeting, but I've gathered that, well, he's an international traveler, this Michael, international traveler, and based in South Africa, I imagine. So it's really South Africa, I feel, meets North America or Turtle Island, me being a small representative of the territory here in Montreal or Jotjage. So just want to start out by thanking the Creator for bringing us together. It's no coincidence that everyone is here to listen. And so it's a very old way that we give thanks. We say, Nyawa Sungoya Dizu. Ne di Nuroyan, Wawayan Dao ne di now da the word ne di Hunzade. My apologies to the translator, she won't understand. But in English, I'm saying thanks for the Creator. He's put everything on the earth and it's still doing its responsibilities here. And I leave it to you to kind of fill in the rest of how you give your thanksgiving. Here in Montreal, Jotjage, and Ganyangahaga territory. But let's also give credit to the Algonquin and the Anishinaabe. I'm half Anishinaabe, so I'll include that part as well. It's good for them. So I'm covered two ways. Yes, I won't get in trouble that way. So to start, I thought I would make it personal with significant highlights in the amount of time that I have, the short amount of time. I think it'll go fast. But I want to hit some key messages, and I'll start by saying, I'll do it this way. I was born in the USA. That's why I kind of chose my ribbon shirt today with the American flag theme. Some things are not so proud to be in how America is developed today, but I kind of wear it as symbolic of where I come from. And I was there in Detroit, Michigan, US of A. From when I was born to Native parents, a Mohawk father, an Ojibwe mother, went through the Catholic school system, a college prep school called University of Detroit High School, where I met the Jesuits, and then went on to University of Detroit in an engineering program, but then it was too tough, and I actually dropped out after 2.5 years. What did I do after that? I moved to Ganawage, had an opportunity to help aging relatives, my father's relatives, age 21. And I thought it was like in literature or history or mythology, I draw comparisons to, it's the classic hero's journey. He has to leave home. A person has to leave home and find himself, goes through obstacles and overcome obstacles, and struggles and challenges and gets into trouble, and that was all me. I did that as a young man, 21 to say 28 or so, doing foolish things as young men sometimes do. But that was balanced out by being amongst Mohawk people. The culture was good, the language was good to learn, and how it works as a newcomer being on the reserve. Everyone asks, all the old timers, the elders, they say, "Who's your mother? Who's your grandfather?" And that's how it became known as, "Oh, that's Mary's my grandmother. Mary's that's her son, her grandson." And then some people knew my grandfather, who was like 6'3", 6'4". I'm named after him, Thomas. They called his nickname was the Judge. Apparently, he had some little bit of wisdom. People came to him for good advice. And so it is interesting now that here I am, kind of sharing a little bit and being a counselor for so many years. It kind of comes around full circle, maybe. Anyway, got involved in the community, did some foolish things, but also a significant event was 1990, Oka crisis. I was, the way I got involved in the community was I volunteered for the fire department. I was a firefighter and ambulance worker. By 1986, I was certified. I also got involved in the Knights of Columbus, the Catholic fraternity organization. That's how I got to know a lot of the people. But 1990 was significant. I was working really quickly. I don't want to go into it too much, but I felt some anger at the Canadian Army for invading Katori-Tekakwitha Island. On that day, don't remember the date, but I remember it was helicopters on the island, and everybody went there. And a buddy of mine had a set of golf clubs. He was with me at my work. He said, "Let's go there." So, okay, we went there, and he pulled out a driver, and I think I pulled out a 9-iron, ready to do some damage maybe to the Canadian Army soldiers who were there, and their barbed wire was there. Some of this is documented in National Film Board documentaries. The end result was, by the end of that day, Canadian Army had to evacuate. They went there just searching for weapons, and there was a marina, a social club there. I think they didn't find any weapons, but they may have confiscated some alcohol, which was allowed. But tear gas, so that was an experience. But I guess as a young man, I wasn't filled with anger, but I knew it wasn't fair. And I was trying to protect, and the hospital is so close. And if you can imagine, the tear gas is drifting by the winds towards the hospital, towards the sick. And that wasn't a pleasant experience. So we definitely made a stand that day and further on also, and the barricades and so on. But I'll fast forward to working in the community, wanting to help, wanting to be of service. That was probably the formation with the Jesuits, to be of service. Started kind of involved with the Catholic Church, but not so much. But I got a job in the organization that I'm working with now. Started in 1993. I got a chance to work with teenagers, with a teen group, doing prevention, prevention against drugs and alcohol. That lasted about a year, probably because I didn't have really the background, not enough education or training in that area. I had trouble with my boss, who was a female. I had trouble with probably all of authority, but female authority also. Had to work on that. And just the stress, probably PTSD. Something's going on there with the outside our neighbors. So I had to work on that too. All to say, this is what I did. But when I had to, I'll call it a burnout situation for a year. That's why I had to leave. And you're the last person. I was the last person to know, but I was telling people, like, this is happening, not sleeping well, not eating well. I'm go. It says a father figure who happened to be the fire chief said, you should go. It sounds like you're describing a burnout situation. Why don't you give a call to KSCS or call someone to get help, which I did. And I got 10 sessions of therapy, and I was assessed by a person who we worked together in a sense. We were on the same team. She became a psychologist. And after that therapy, I made a vow. After 10 sessions, I can remember tears coming down my face to say, I'm never going to put myself in that situation again. I'm going to do some inner work on myself. And some of that inner work happened to be with my family. My father used alcohol, and I can remember a couple of times in high school, high school, freshman year and sophomore year, I failed math class or pre-calculus. Still, I have no use for that calculus. Some of these higher, but I was shamed. He taped the report card, and I had to go to summer school to add injury to insult. So I had to work on that on the father's side, my father's side. But I had an opportunity to do that when there was an opportunity to study social work with the professors coming to the reserve. It was an off-campus Aboriginal social work program through Carleton University in Ottawa. And it was probably the only chance I could do classes. I was still working, living paycheck to paycheck, but taking classes on the weekends. So it was about 3.5 years of that, resulting in a certificate, close to a BSW, the bachelor's degree, but I couldn't do the stage work in some of the classes. Just impossible. But this is so 97. I had made a career move. I did a journalist. I was a journalist and photographer for the Eastern Door. Again, kind of building integrity as a person who's honest and just tells the truth. I had a good mentor, Kenneth Deere, who some of you may know. He does United Nations work in Geneva and New York, and a traditional-minded person. Really learned a lot from him. I kind of used this journalist job to jump into politics. I ran for a band council in 1998, July. And lo and behold, I think there was 11 spots, and I was the 11th one. And I knocked off, you won't know this, but I knocked off my cousin, Billy Two Rivers, who served a long time as a counselor. I think it was 20 years. So I was the 11th, and he was number 12 on 40 votes or so. So my time it was my time. So I had health portfolio besides the other political stuff, weekly meetings. Very interesting, but there is, they say politics, there's backstabbing, there's some alliances are formed, some are good, but there's a lot of backdoor or secret meetings. I did run again, but overall the experience was pleasant, eye-opening life lessons that I really benefited from. I did run again, and I was short by maybe 5 votes, and I was eligible for a recount, but something happened, and there was an objection, and so I was kind of left without a job and try to build a career on 2 years. No, not easy. But I decided to revert to the social work background. 2001, got my foot in the door as a case aide, working with elementary school behavior problem with the teenagers, these kids. And there was an the caseworker was in charge, like the case manager, and I was like a shadow and transporter. That was my foot in the door. Then I did youth protection for a couple of years, really tough. I got the bad boys, and some of them are bad parents too. The bad parents will say, "No, it's not my kids who are doing that. You got to fix them. You got to look elsewhere for solutions." So that court process. After a couple of years, I made a lateral move on doing counseling. Did a lot of assessments and supportive counseling. And trying to just find my way. And it was hard for me to think of it as a career. Still doing ambulance, still involved with the church a little bit. I was married in 1991 to a Mohawk and Ojibwe woman. Imagine that. Well, imagine my luck in finding the right combination. But yeah, that was really, really fun and good to have family. really good to have family. And so I was saying the supportive counseling, 2017 is a significant year because I finally ended up where I really thought I was supposed to be, and that's in a traditional support role. Traditional support worker is my job title now. I was actually selectively recruited to fill this position, working with residential school survivors and working with the families. And so it's what I studied in Carleton and elsewhere, and a lot of training and workshops. So that was fine. Intergenerational effects and families, because that's what I found from '84 to to that time, 2000. A lot of residents were shipped out to a place called Spanish in Ontario, about a 10-hour train ride. Sometimes they came back for the summer, sometimes not. But most times they had a hard time fitting back in, or they turned to alcohol or drugs to kind of fit in, or they tried to fit into the city, or they went away ironworking still with the alcohol and addictions. And so that's what I found in the families. So they did the best they could, and maybe it's known that Mohawk women are very strong, assertive. Some say aggressive, but I don't use aggressive, just assertive and take charge because they had to manage the household while the men were working away in New York State, where the wages are the best, or Boston, or Texas, or any place where others were Detroit, Buffalo. I got a coworker whose husband worked on Golden Gate Bridge, and multiple arenas and anywhere steel is going up. So Mohawk men are very proud of that. Trouble is, they work hard, but they also play hard. So they can walk an I-beam very straight, but after a few hours at the bar, they're going to walk crooked on the sidewalk, and it's unfortunately just a little joke there. But they say that's to replenish the fluids from working hard. So that's a reputation. There's a lot of history there, and that's the thing too. Especially since '84, but everywhere I went, I was often the youngest person amongst the older guys, hung out, got stories. So it's really oral tradition being passed down, which I appreciated. The ceremonies, longhouse, but in other ways too, like the pipe. The pipe is not really a Mohawk, it's Lakota or Ojibwe, but that came to me, so it was probably meant to be, no coincidence that it came to me and I accepted it, and I work with that, and other people seem to have a benefit working with that. And so I'm an advocate for the ceremonies, the cycle of ceremonies of the Mohawk, and now it's like Maple Festival, Maple Time. There's a cycle of ceremonies throughout the year, which I really push and advocate. Besides a sweat lodge, besides a vision quest, besides fasting, besides purification. I know a few songs. Don't have the greatest vocal range, but I know a few songs, and just do the best. And with my words, try to. And over the years, especially since 2017, working in a spiritual way, which was, I guess, it started. Maybe a seed was planted in my high school years, and just coming back to me. But I've always had a connection with people. Maybe religious, have a formation, ministers or priests, nuns, or someone who have that formation, that theology, or Mother Earth theology, maybe that some First Nations people call that theology of Mother Earth. This natural law understanding that we're all spiritual beings, having a human experience for a little while, and after we're done, we're going to go back to this place, this Garunyage, or this Yungwe Unwe, the place of the everlasting life, or sky world. So that's what I use in my counseling, and that's where I use that. I use it wherever I see fit. So it's kind of like a customized role. Close to, I was talking earlier with someone who has studying to be a chaplain, and that's no coincidence too why we met, but I appreciated the idea of she wanting to help Indigenous and just having a connection. And that's what it's really about, is having a healing from the past, And I saw it somewhere on, I think on the poster. And that's what I did for myself. And that's what I try to do with my clients, the people I work with, try to heal their past, build up their spirit, help them find their spirit, and so they can carry on and empower them to do the healing like I did. And I wouldn't advocate or recommend anyone follow the path that I did, but everyone's got to walk their own path. And I got this certain age, so I recognize everyone's got to walk their healing road or their red road. And sometimes I just play detective and just talk to people and find out, how did you do that? How did you get through some things? And everyone's got a story, and sometimes you learn from the stories. And so that's what I was looking forward to this evening, because I'm hoping to learn from Michael and learn from the questions, and maybe to give back a little bit of the knowledge and the teaching, just the feel of it, of how it works. And it's a common theme, I guess, today. Common theme of in mainstream what's reconciliation? How do we heal? We know about the TRC and the 94 calls to action, and justice and politics, education, and the churches. The Pope Francis has visited. What's happening next? I'm aware Indigenous leaders have a voice. They've always had a voice, but now they intend to use it. We intend to gather. I say we because I'm a part of that. Not necessarily in Montreal area, but in Ottawa and elsewhere. I'm part of a national committee that has religious leadership and Indigenous members trying to talk about what happens next. How do we get through the effects, and what's the next steps? And I've studied it, and I've got teachings on it that I'll go through like 4 points that come to mind. We have the opportunity nowadays, present day, to kind of unsettle the system. And that's why I'm so eager to hear about how the apartheid was unsettled and shaken apart. Could have been a bloodbath, but it wasn't. Not so much, the way I understand, but it was a systemic thing. And I guess everyone, in a way, was kind of a victim. So you just have to be honest and tell what you did, and try to forgiveness and acceptance and all that included. But this number one thing is we can all unsettle, and that's the job for Indigenous and the job for non-Indigenous. We can all, because we know right from wrong, we know what's good, so we know where to make changes. There's a second part that for Indigenous people, we're reclaiming our ways. In Mohawk, we say "Dini Guadihodas," that's our ways. Includes language, culture, ceremonies, our worldview. Once we know our creation story and we get an understanding of our peacemaker story and how beautiful it is, condolence ceremony, and we know our life's purpose, and we know what our job is for here, and we know what our job is for when we return back to that everlasting life place. There's a third part of we're not alone, Indigenous people. We've always been like treaty people. We were by ourselves, but then we had visitors come from across the salt water, and we have a job. The relationship was good at one time, no doubt about it. But then those who are familiar with like the Kairos blanket exercise scripts, it talks about, they wanted land, the settlers wanted land, and then they took and they stole, and we got outnumbered, and they just took what then. So there was a big encroachment across Turtle Island, North America, and the land became really postage-sized stamps for the Indigenous people, and the Inuit were sent to barren lands and so on. But we have a job to rebuild that relationship because we're treaty people, and the Mohawks have this in the form of wampum belts. Around 1600, 1613 is roughly the time of the two-row wampum belt and the founding, or not the founding, but the use of the Hiawatha belt, which is 5 nations. I don't know if anyone has a symbol of that. But that means a relationship. So it's Indigenous and non-Indigenous. And the 3 basic principles of that are respect, mutual respect, friendship, and peace. And peace is something you really have to work on. It's not the absence of war. it's something. It's an active effort to make peaceful relations, first within yourself, I believe, and then with your neighbor. And there's a fourth part after reclaiming, rebuilding, reclaiming. Reclaiming, rebuilding is the third, and then the fourth one is just actions that are in line with, promoting reconciliation and healing. Everything is in line. You know what needs to be changed in the system. You have a foundation of where you come from, your worldview. It's filled with values based on Mohawks, Ojibways have 7 grandfather teachings. Mohawks have peace, power, and righteousness, peace, respect, all these things, love and compassion also, and that's the way it should. That's the way it should flow. So that's where I find myself present day in my job. But then I'm also kind of generous with my time. I find the opportunity to help work in the homeless shelters where, in a way, I have to adjust my thinking because there is substance use. But I'll tell you, everyone deserves this dignity. Everyone deserves this respect. When they say they want me to pray over them, to pass a few words to them, I don't refuse. Whereas my job, I kind of require, be sober, and for the most part it happens. But when male, female, they know who I am now after 3 years. They know, they know that's the elder, elder, or the praying guy, the good guy. And I get to know the community, and so they get to know me. So when they ask for prayer, someone just lost their partner, their boyfriend, and they don't see a way forward. Spend some time with her. Someone, you can see them everywhere. The homeless, Milton Park, or it used to be behind Complex G5 Row. Now they're all over. Open Door, but everyone's got a story once again. And if you take the time, I found residential schools in their history, in their family. And they came down south and they got stuck here for various reasons. Some of it was for medical, and then they never got back, never made their way back. Crees, Inuit. And being the social beings that they are, they want to be together. So in this way, they're hanging together for that. And I would always advocate for, let's get more Inuit resources. Let's get more Cree resources. Mohawks are there. Some of them are there from the community. It's nice to see. And we have a perspective, and we're also teaching the non-native workers. And the executive director, as an organization, has said, we want to indigenize. So there's another big word, indigenize, decolonize. And it's working. It's tough. It's a challenge because you're working with a system, Montreal, and the mayor, and a budget, and many challenges. But there's people out there doing that work. And in a way, isn't it? It's about understanding. It's reconciliation too. When you talk to them and know their story, know where they come from, you pick up a few Inuktitut words, and it's a connection. And maybe they're having a good day today, but somewhere in the future, and I've been to a few celebrations of life. They do pass away. They have health issues, and sometimes they pass away in the dorms or they pass away in the room. Medical issues, and so you get to talk to the family, and it's real. So the idea is to relieve suffering, and that's my job, of relieving suffering, and I suspect that's what healing of memories is all about as well. Healing that suffering, healing the spirit. We talk about soul retrieval, spirit retrieval. So I'm going to see how I'm doing for time. Yeah, I knew that. I'm pretty good, aren't I? I'm pretty good. So I don't really have any prepared closing words, but just to repeat, it's a good feeling to have know some people I know, even young ones, and we're going to have a dance or hear some songs later on, and just talk a little bit, and hopefully with the questions we can increase our understanding. And I can have the benefit of listening to Michael. And Yeah. And the tobacco here is loaded, the pipe is loaded, so we may smoke that at the end just to have everyone's words kind of and intentions be shared at this time. And so in that sense, it's simple, but it's also, it brings some importance to it. So I recognize that. That's the way I feel. It's a really important thing. And so nothing prevents us really from doing these things again in the future. That's what I always say. And it's just an opportunity. And so I can't think of any other place where I'd rather be than right here. So I'll end it here. Nyawa, miigwech.
No, thank you, Tom, and thank you to all of you. I'd like to honor the First Nations of this sacred land where we are today. Different peoples, different nations who were here. It's always good to be in Canada. My young sister here reminded me that we first met in 1985 in Zimbabwe when we were both still children. So it's good to be meeting old and new friends. And in this beautiful center, the First People's Justice Center of Montreal, my first time to be in this center. And thank you also to CSJR, who have long been partnering with the Institute for Healing of Memories. And thank you, Tom, for there were the many points in where you spoke where I thought, okay, there's an intersection with what our work as an institute. Also, I'm just to say I'm here with Pilani, who's joined the paparazzi. He's over there standing. He comes from Durban in South Africa, where I come from, Cape Town in South Africa. And we like to say that all people have a story to tell and every story needs a listener. So I'm thinking of actually going home now and leaving you guys to talk to each other. I think you could have some very interesting conversations together. And I'll come back in the morning and find out how it went. And my own history with the beautiful people of this part of Turtle Island goes back quite a long way. In 1983, I visited 20 Canadian cities in 6 weeks. I'm still recovering. And on that particular visit, I was a representative of the African National Congress of South Africa, and traveling with a beautiful woman, Susan Yedinwa, a Namibian woman representing SWAPO. You can imagine in that 6 weeks, we knew each other's speech perfectly. And so we said, we dared each other one day, we'd make each other's speech and see if people notice. Her speech began, I am a mother of 7 children. I didn't quite have the courage to begin my speech in that way. Now, just for a few months, I was living in the United Kingdom, and I heard it's a bit chilly here, so I bought this tweed jacket, and I wore this all the way across these 20 Canadian cities. And then I went back to live in Zimbabwe. I put the jacket in the cupboard. 7 years later, I came back to Canada wearing the same jacket. And people didn't seem to remember my speeches, but they remembered the jacket. And when and it was after that second visit, just a week later, that I was bombed, in fact. So this friend of mine in Edmonton sent me a message, and she said, I hope the bastards did not get the jacket. Well, it's true, the jacket sort of survived rather better than I did, it has to be said. And then I came back the following year. During that visit in 1990, I met a lot of school children. And there was a particular group of children I met in a class in North Bay. And the teacher said to these children, 8, 9 years old, they said, you know this guy, Father Michael, he was with us last week, he told you about apartheid in South Africa. And the kids were traumatized because there was somebody they had met and seen. And so the children said, what can we do? So they decided to do paintings. Every child in that class did a painting. And they sent them to me. I had them first in my hospital room in Zimbabwe, and then I was flown to Australia for 7 months. And again, there were these pictures of children. And, you know, a little bit of the time I thought perhaps it would be better to be dead. I'd never met someone with no hands. I knew another priest who also had a letter bomb, but he lost one hand. So he did everything with the remaining hand. So losing 2 hands was not twice as bad, it was 200 times as bad. But when I looked at these pictures from children and said, but you're loved, you're supported, you're prayed for. Why are you feeling sorry for yourself? The struggle for you now is the struggle to get well, the struggle to return, the struggle to live my life as joyfully, as completely as possible. A year later, I came back to Canada. I came back to North Bay. I came back to that classroom. I came back to those children and said, thank you for your part in my healing. And I often tell that story when I talk to children in many parts of the world and talk to them about how children can be the healers of adults as well as to be the healers of one another. But let me sort of go back a step. I was born in Aotearoa, New Zealand. When I was 4, I had this crisis. I couldn't decide when I grew up, should I be a priest in the church or a clown in the circus? So when I was ordained a priest, you remember those things that are called telegrams? Remember when we were young? Telegrams?
I read about in the history books, yeah.
Yeah. So my brother sent me a telegram when I was ordained a priest and said, well, now you've succeeded at both. But again, I was a sort of quick on the move in a sense. I went to a monastery when I was 17, an Anglican monastery in Australia, and joined a religious order, Society of the Sacred Mission, of which I'm still a member, 53 years later. And then when I finished my training as a priest, my community said, what do you want to do next? I said, well, I'd love to go and work in Japan, where the community was working. They said, that's great. We'll send you to South Africa. I think they called that the vow of obedience. But you know, I knew a lot about South Africa before I went there. I had a lot of head knowledge, but not much heart knowledge. So I thought when I got to South Africa, I was going to find 3 groups of people: the oppressed, the oppressor, the third group called the human race that I would belong to. And of course, you know, I'm an Anglican, so I think it's important to be in the middle. Maybe a bit on the rich side, but nevertheless in the middle. And of course, I discovered that if you were white, you were part of the oppressor group. You could be against apartheid, but you were its beneficiary. So for me, I often say that when I arrived in South Africa, I stopped being a human being and became a white man. Because suddenly, every single aspect of my life was decided by the color of my skin. The university I could study in, the suburb I could live in, the bathroom I could use, the park bench I could sit on. There was no escape from whiteness. So I joined the liberation struggle, not as a favor to black people, but to recover my own humanity, in solidarity with black people struggling for their own basic human rights. And the turning point for my generation was 1976. We were talking earlier today with the politics of language here in Canada, indigenous languages, and this little quarrel that you, French and English, had with each other as well. That seems to be part of Canada's history here and there. And of course, 76 was about the politics of language in South Africa, because suddenly black school children were forced to learn their lessons in Afrikaans, which was seen to be the language of oppression. And school children began to be shot on the streets until more than 1,000 children had been shot. So I was the national chaplain for Anglican students in 1976 for English-speaking, Afrikaans-speaking, black and white university students. And then I was expelled, and I went to live in Lesotho. You know, I spent a lot of time in the United States, and I know you were born there, but as you know, they don't study geography in the United States. Once you get beyond Mexico, it gets a bit vague. So, of course, Lesotho is this tiny African country, completely surrounded by South Africa. We used to say we lived in the belly of the monster. Now, interestingly, when I went to Lesotho, just a short time before that, Desmond Tutu had just become a bishop. He said I was the most difficult priest he ever had. But nevertheless, we were to become lifelong friends, and he became the patron of our Institute for Healing of Memories. But there, I joined the African National Congress of South Africa, which of course had been legal since 1912, but had been illegal from 1960, and had begun an armed struggle after 50 years of non-violence. Unlike Western countries who spend about 5 minutes before they pick up the arms. But also, I came to see the power of language, both to reveal and to mystify. So when the government used violence against the people, it was called the defense of law and order. When the people picked up weapons, eventually it was called violence and terrorism. So the very words mystified the reality of what was in fact happening. So after a massacre in Lesotho, where I was absent but believed to be one of the targets by church authorities, I had to leave Lesotho. And of course, as I said, that was the end of that year. I visited Canada for the first time. So then I lived in Zimbabwe from 83 until 1992. You know, I often think that as South Africans, we're very fortunate. And the reason I say that is because our struggle became the struggle of all humanity. By the middle of the 90s, you could go anywhere in the world and you'd find an anti-apartheid movement. If you ask political leaders of my generation across the world, when did you first get involved in politics? They'll tell you it was the anti-apartheid movement at universities and churches and colleges across the world. Many other struggles have deserved to be the struggle of all humanity, but haven't been. So, of course, finally, the apartheid regime bowed. The clerk didn't see the Lord on the road to Damascus. The pressure was too great, both from within the country and from outside the country. The power of the anti-apartheid movement, the solidarity organizations, but also the sanctions, which Archbishop Tutu championed. And even Western countries supported apartheid. But a bit like what's happened now with Israel, were brought kicking and screaming to a different position by the people in the street, put such pressure that governments were forced to I think it was, who was the US president at the time of sanctions? Was it Nixon? I'm trying to remember. But he wouldn't pass the sanctions bill. But again, the Congress eventually overruled and forced that to happen. Now, about 3 years before 1990, I had been told by the government of Zimbabwe, you're on a government hit list. They want to kill you. So I lived with armed police guards 24 hours a day for several years. Of course, when I say that, you think, well, you must have been quite dangerous. But I can confess to you tonight that the only automatic weapon I've ever used in my life is my tongue. So they were a little bit stupid. I mean, they took away my hands, which I didn't need for shooting, and they left my weapon working reasonably well. Don't you think, Tom?
Yeah, I think so.
Not bad. But so what happened? I came to Canada just after Nelson Mandela was released from prison. The Canadian churches invited me. They said, we don't really understand what exactly is happening in South Africa. Is it the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning? And I remember saying across this country, we have begun, the curtain has gone up on the last act of the apartheid drama. But we don't know how long it will take and what cost. And of course, during that period of negotiations, we lost thousands of lives. The apartheid regime took its destabilization of the whole region back home to South Africa. So you'd have people going to work on commuter trains, and men with automatic weapons would enter the train and just mow down black commuters. So I came back from Canada, and there were 2 religious magazines waiting for me, posted from South Africa. So I opened the magazines, exploded. So that's how I lost my hands and eye, eardrum shattered. And I suppose in a way, what could be a more cynical way of killing a priest than sending him religious magazines, knowing that in fact he would open. Now, like the children of North Bay, I was very fortunate. Prayer, love, support from across the globe. Because I lived in Southern Africa for the previous 14 years, but I traveled the world as part of the struggle against apartheid, specifically mobilizing the faith community to say, at stake in South Africa, it's not simply a justice issue, it's not simply a human rights issue, it's not just a political issue, it's a faith issue. Because the apartheid regime claimed divine guidance. They even wrote it into the Constitution, guided by God from generation to generation. So when I was bombed, there were all these messages from across the globe, from Christians, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, atheists, communists. So I often say I won't need a funeral when I die, because people say all the nice things then. I don't know why people wait till we're dead before they say all these nice things about us. But so I want to say the same thing with some different language. So my story was acknowledged, reverenced, recognized, and given a moral content. And I want to just for a moment speak about the difference between knowledge and acknowledgement. Often in families, where there has been domestic violence or gender-based violence, everybody knows what's happening. There's knowledge, but there's no acknowledgement. And this point about knowledge and acknowledgement applies to individuals, families, churches, communities, tribes, nations, this issue of knowledge and acknowledgement. But I learned something very important. I've had the privilege of working with the Sami people, the First Nations of in the top of Norway, Sweden, Finland, some into Russia. And I think it was in Norway, they said to me, our king, the king of Norway, made an apology to the Sami people for the nation's part in their oppression. And they said the problem is, in the mainstream of the society, there is no knowledge about what is being acknowledged. So thank you very much for the apology, but the mainstream knows nothing about what actually was done to us and our pain. Again, I spent a great deal of time in the United States, and I've often thought that white America has no comprehension of the pain that is black America. So I came to see that that knowledge and acknowledgement are important. I was doing some work in Hawaii. No one believes you can work in Hawaii, but nevertheless, and we're working with a group of women who had been abused across generations, and the only person. There was only two guys in the room, my colleague and the two of us, and everybody else were women. And I felt moved to say, I feel guilt and shame as a man for what you've experienced as women. And one of the women began to cry, and she said, never, never in my life have I ever heard a man say, I'm sorry about what you have experienced. So it's not that I had done it, but I'm a man, and it's men that all those women had experienced that abuse for. And of course, this issue of apology is a big issue. Leaders, prime ministers, and presidents are not very good at saying those words. I'm sorry. But as you know well here. Apology is not the end of the journey, it's the beginning of another journey. And it's not worth very much if you don't deal with, what flows from that. If terrible things happen to people, there's likely to be one of two journeys, to you or your loved ones. One is victims who become victimizers, who become victims, who become victimizers, which crosses generations. Again, it's true of individuals, it's true of communities, it's true of nations. One of our great leaders, Chief Lutuli, once said, those who think of themselves as victims eventually become the victimizers of others and give themselves permission to victimize others because of what was done to them. What happened on September the 11th? The United States had the sympathy of the world. Their response was, become victimizers. Not even of those who did it, but of another nation. Now the fact that she's moved that, does it mean I should withdraw what I just said? So that's one journey, I say, that crosses generations. And it can be an interplay between what happens in public space and what happens in private space. So lots of evidence, for example, the soldiers coming back from war, either self-harm. In the United States, more soldiers commit suicide than die in combat, or drugs or alcohol, or in domestic family sexual violence, about which for generations there's been silence, and it's not just suddenly started happening, but the silence has been broken, and it's coming out more and more. Now the other potential journey is the journey of victim, survivor, victor. People often talk about being victims or survivors, but survivors are still very passive. This happened to me, I'm not dead, I survive. So becoming a victor is about taking back agency. I know one or two of you have got some Christian tendencies, and it is Holy Week, but the Jesus who's crucified doesn't become a victimizer; he becomes victorious. So in the Christian story is this idea of death and resurrection. Now you may be not at all religious or belong to any world religion or to none, but I want to suggest to you that is part of the pattern of the universe, in fact. The pattern, this ancient pattern of suffering, death, resurrection, and new life. So the big question is, what is the key to which journey you travel? The victim, victimizer, or victim, survivor, victor. Now I'll come back to this word, acknowledgement. acknowledgement and the power of acknowledgement. That so often when people have been victimized, the only thing they have is their victimhood. And again, if we were to think about gender-based violence, the moral order is also inverted. Good is called bad, and bad is called good. I'm doing this to you because you're a bad woman. And in our work, when people come and tell their story, and sometimes they said, I was abused when I was 5 years old. I tried to tell my mother, and she said to go away. And so I've stayed with that for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So finally, when it is heard, it is believed, it is acknowledged, that can be the turning point where victimhood is laid to rest and people take back agency. So when I went to hospital in Australia, they said, well, you'll be with us for 18 months. I said, no, I'm really sorry, I don't have so much time. I'll give you 7 months. So I gave them 7 months, and I returned. Just another tiny story. When I came back to Zimbabwe, I went to see my bishop. Now, just before I went to hospital in Australia, the bishop came to pray for me. So off I go to hospital. 7 months later, I come back and say, here I am. So the bishop is looking a bit confused, upset. And he said, but you're disabled now, what can you do? So I said, well, I can drive a car. At which point he looked scared. I think he thought he was going to be on the same road that I was. So I said, Bishop, I think I can be more of a priest with no hands than I ever was with 2 hands. And how's your arithmetic? From 1990, this is 2024? What's that? 34 years? It's a reasonable time. Now, interesting is another bishop whose name you all know, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Archbishop Desmond Tutu says to me, he said, come and work in my diocese. He says, I've got one priest who's blind, one who cannot hear properly, and now one with no hands. Wow! So for one bishop, and the first bishop was not a bad person, but it was beyond his imagination that I could be a priest in his diocese. But Archbishop Tutu looked at me with a different pair of spectacles and saw what kind of ministry that I could have. So, returning to South Africa, I discovered a damaged nation, a nation damaged in our humanity, damaged by what we'd done, by what had been done to us, and by what we failed to do. And like we've said several times, all of us with a story to tell. I became chaplain to a trauma center for victims of violence and torture. And I spent 5 years there, and my colleagues were psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers. I was the priest. No one knew what the priest was supposed to do, which was great. So I did what I did, and I said, that's what priests do in trauma centers. But that 5 years taught me something very important. On the people that we met, I came to see that, yes, we all had a story to tell. We had all been wounded by the apartheid years, but we were not all pathological. We didn't all need clinical intervention. Some of us needed long-term clinical intervention, But the most of us, we were living our lives. We were having relationships, we were having working lives, we were doing our thing. But we still had unfinished business from the past. We still had deep feelings of hatred and bitterness and anger because of, and guilt and shame. Because one of the things we've learned in this work, all of us are capable of being both perpetrator and victim. And we can be both at the same time. And most of us are clear about the ways we're victims, but we're a bit hazy about the ways in which we are perpetrators. Now also, it was the time of the preparation for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Interestingly, our first democratic parliament in South Africa spent more time discussing that legislation than any other piece of legislation in the first democratic parliament. There's this plan for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So we in the faith community came together and said, even before the commission started, what's our role? And at the very first meeting, I said, my question is, what happens to the people who don't come to the commission? Now, at that stage, we had no idea how many people would come. Now, in reality, 23,000 people came to the commission. 18,800 were declared to be victims. But we're a nation of 55, 60 million people. So what about all those stories? And so that led some of us to say, okay, we're going to create a methodology in which over 3 days, in fact, when we were beginning this, the first workshop we had took 2 hours. And I was worried we'd given too much time for storytelling. But over a year, we developed this model that took 2.5 days. And we said to people, come to our workshop, we promise you one step on the road to healing, one step. And we wrote to everybody in the Western Cape who had given evidence to the commission, inviting them, if they wished, to come to this workshop. But then something else happened. 1998, we founded the Institute. I mean, the Institute had a longer pregnancy than an elephant. It was about 4 or 5 years before the baby was actually born. Then we were invited to Rwanda 4 years after the genocide, where the big question was, how do we avoid the genocide of tomorrow? How do we break that cycle? And the other place we're invited to, not the United States, but to New York City. You know, that's another country. And we went to a church, a very famous church. Some of you, I'm sure, know it, Riverside Church in New York. And many of the people who came to that workshop had been part of the civil rights movement. But they said it was the first time they'd had an opportunity to speak about their pain. And then we began to be invited across the world. Also, I had a memoir telling my story, Redeeming the Past. They began to be published in more and more languages. I think we're up to 16, 17 languages. And as I say, we're invited to every continent on the planet. And so one began to see that healing of memories is about the human family. That none of us will walk this earthly life without wounding other people. None of us will walk this earthly life and not be wounded. So the question is not whether we're wounded or not. The question is, how do we respond? Do we become prisoners of moments in history? Or do we find the journey to healing, as long as it may take? And then also, thanks to some friends of mine here in Montreal and also to Estelle with CSJR, we had a launch of the French edition here in Montreal. And then God spoke to Estelle and said, Estelle, you're going to organize a Healing of Memories workshop. And Estelle is very obedient to God's voice. And so now, over a period of some years, we have a small team of facilitators for healing of memories. And from the beginning, we've worked particularly with a number of the Inuit nation who have been part of. And next week, I'm going to Nunavik. Is it right, Nunavik? Yeah, I'm going to Nunavik. I don't believe in climate change, but could people pray it's a bit warm next week? Just where these 2 children from Africa go up north.
Pray for you to get another tweed jacket.
Aha, there you go. In fact, we have been borrowed, not tweed, but another one, and boots.
An Inuit jacket.
An Inuit jacket, there you go. And in fact, we've had this privilege of working with. I was telling someone this story tonight. We're working with a group of women in Alice Springs, in the centre of Australia, of the Aranda Nation. They were women. They were all artists, and we were beginning a 3-day workshop. At the end of the first night, the women said, well, goodbye. We're not going to see you anymore. Okay, why? They said, we're going hunting tomorrow. And obviously, hunting is much more interesting than healing memories. So then the next morning, I thought, well, let me go to the venue just in case. There were 3 times as many women as the night before. So I said, I thought you said you were going hunting. They said, yes, but we can hunt anytime. But we can't do this anytime. So there they were. And in fact, on our, our logo, it's partly based on a painting of the Aranda Nation called Women Talking Stories, because they said, you can choose one of our paintings as a gift to appreciate what you've done with us. So it's great to be back here in Canada. It's and to catch up with where the long journey. And I think, incidentally, Pilani and I had the privilege of a 45-minute meeting with Pope Francis, one-on-one kind of meeting. And my friend was the Anglican Bishop of Edmonton, Jane Alexander, and she had been writing every year to Pope Francis about the issue of apology. And so we discussed it with Pope Francis. It was one of the items on our agenda. And of course, subsequently, Pope Francis came. And I know there's still questions and controversy and all of that, about that. Because, you see, in a way, as an institute, we're committed to contributing to healing the wounds of history. Healing the wounds of history. And I don't think the great maker will say to Tom, have you sorted out everything in your community? Is everything okay now?
No, sir.
But God might say to Tom, my child, did you face your own need of healing? And have you contributed to helping others to heal? And that's all that's all is true for any of us. If we can answer that question. I'm sorry that I only have a 5-minute speech, so I better stop now. Thank you very much.
When we sing these songs and we share some of the heartaches of our people, this isn't to make anybody feel accountable. This isn't to make anybody feel sad or feel bad. But this is a way that we share the truths and share what had happened. And it's a way for us, me and my wife, to heal for our children that are here with us. It's a way for us to understand that it's time for our generations to try and heal and move forward and not be held back by those traumas that affected our people for so many years.